Yeah. And to our high school audience, can you, you discussed or you talked about the functions of the innate and the adaptive immune system. So can you explain the differences between the two?
Yes, so innate immune system, when we talk about it, we talk about the first line of defense, which is, you, let's say you get to have a cut and there are some bacteria in there. What happens is that there are cells such as macrophages that are going to, that have receptors to see, oh, hey, we have now a new sort of pattern in the body that's not supposed to exist, right? And they respond by releasing molecules that causes inflammation. And then there is also dendritic cells. Again, these are specialized cells which will sort of eat the bacteria and present part of the bacteria to specialized cells like T cells and B cells, right? And these are the adaptive immune cells. So in the context of seeing an antigen in an inflammatory environment, then the adaptive immune system is going to learn, okay, there is this particular bacteria, and the B cells can make antibody. You don't really get an antibody response. That's probably more against viruses. Let's say you will make these antibodies, and they can neutralize the virus. But inflammation is a key. So, for example, when you get vaccinated, right? The COVID vaccines, for example, the Covaxin, the indigenous Indian vaccine, it's a killed bacteria, so it's inactivated. Sorry, a virus, inactivated virus. But there is also an adjuvant. It's typically an aluminium-based adjuvant, alum or something that they use, um, and that is what's causing the inflammation. So even if you give the antigen without the inflammation, your immune system is sort of dormant. It's not awake, you need to hit it. So that's why inflammation is an intrinsic part of the innate immune system. And along with the cells that will present the antigen, they create the correct conditions for your adaptive immunity to be engaged. So these are the differences. The innate is first line of defense. It recognizes broad patterns. It doesn't identify specific targets, creates inflammation, and then engages the adaptive, which has memory. So innate doesn't really have memory. So the adaptive is specific, it's directed against a particular virus, for example, and it also has a tendency or ability to remember. So if you see this virus again, even after a long time, there are memory cells that would then be triggered to divide. And
Yeah.
hopefully this helps.
Yeah, we've learned the same thing in biology. Uh,
Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm remembering and understanding what you're saying. So the implications in figuring out how to make cold tumors hot are immense. The group of receptor tyrosine kinases or TAMS that you are specifically focused on, what kind of study is required to understand the ways to inhibit the TAMS?
Well, so we have, okay, so this is what we have done, right? Like we said that we are on the sort of doorstep of doing this clinical trial. And then, if it works, it's like amazing, right? Um, so what we first had to understand that these molecules are there in the natural context, the context of infection, inflammation, and and often the way we do this, like how are these molecules, like we first notice it's there, right? You can um, you know there are ways to look for RNAs, particular RNAs in a cell or proteins in a cell, and this is how you know that it's there in these particular cells. And then a trick that we very often use now is knocking things out, which means you just go in and make a mouse which lacks these particular genes. Um, so once you get that mouse that lacks these particular genes, And in this case, the people who did this, they were lucky that the mouse, it was not a dead mouse, because very often, some of these genes are so important developmentally that you don't get a live animal. But in this case, they were able to get these animals that everything is normal, they're just fine, uh, looks good. But as they age, they start showing signs of inflammation. And then slowly they develop autoimmunity. So then you realize that, oh, these molecules are playing an important role perhaps in breaking inflammation. In their absence, now you have this exacerbated inflammation. So then you really try to understand how these molecules work. This gives you a very good clue. So then you look at the signaling pathway, right? So what signals this molecule receives, in what context, and how they suppress inflammation. So then you are very confident that it's not an association, there is some causality, and then you test it in more animal models, like in preclinical cancer models. Now, of course, these mice that lacks these receptors, they would be able to defeat tumor. They would be able to mount a very good anti-tumor immune defense. And that's what we see. And then, because our expertise is not in making synthesizing drugs, so there we collaborate with groups that have that particular expertise. And we were lucky to be contacted by a drug company that they have, they follow basic science research, and then they make these drugs, thinking that, some of those would work out in diseases. And then we tie up with them, we collaborate with them. And of course, we are fortunate to have a great cancer center here. So we work with the clinicians that then design clinical trials, right? So again, we work in our specific domains of expertise, and we collaborate, and together. um, it takes many years, from identification of a target, getting a small molecule inhibitor, or an antibody, and then doing these preclinical studies, and then going into clinical trials. And and every step that you go up, it requires a huge investment. It's very expensive. So it's a very complicated, but a concerted effort. And you know it's very difficult for one person to do it. So you require a team, require a group.
Yeah. So,
But I would, if I
yeah,
may add, Varun,
yeah,
um, of course, it's very good if we come up with this principle that ultimately ends up in a new class of drugs and it helps patients. But again, as I was saying earlier, and this is perhaps influenced heavily by the Gita, right? So you focus on the process, and that's really has been our focus. And I tell our group always, just do your job, do it to the best of your ability, focus on the process. Hopefully the result comes, but that's not in your hands. And as I said, we don't have the expertise to do everything. So we are really inspired to ask fundamental questions. And this is obviously one of the things that is very promising. And many things fell by the wayside, but it is really the process of asking these questions, and um, you know this fundamental curiosity and inquisitiveness, that's really the drive. And that's what I seek,
yeah.
look for, and sustains me.